In the eastern reach of the Northern Territories, where the land fell away from the high mountains into a long gray valley of slate and black pine, there was a pack called Cravenmoor. The Cravenmoor pack was not old in the way the great packs of the high country were old. It had no ancient lineage, no carved stone halls, no songs that were sung at the winter fires. It had risen from nothing in the space of 2 generations, and it had risen through one thing only: cruelty applied with precision. The pack alpha of Cravenmoor was a man called Aldric Cravenmoor. Aldric was 51 years old, and he had ruled his pack for 23 of those years, and the tool he ruled by was the lash. The lash was not a metaphor in the Cravenmoor pack. It was a real thing, a length of black leather on a short wooden handle, kept in a locked iron case behind the high seat in the long, low hall of the Cravenmoor keep. The lash was taken out for infractions. The lash was taken out for defiance. The lash was taken out for the crime of looking Aldric Cravenmoor in the eye without permission, or for the crime of speaking out of turn, or for the crime of being an Omega who did not lower her head when a pack-born wolf passed her in the corridors. In the Cravenmoor pack, there was a girl who had felt the lash more than anyone. Her name was Nessa, and she was 22 years old, and she carried the scars of 100 lashes on her back. The scars covered her from her shoulders to the base of her spine. They were raised white ridges on her brown skin, laid down in the careful parallel lines of a man who took pride in the evenness of his work. Some of the scars were old, 10 years old, from the first time she had been lashed at the age of 12 for the crime of refusing to kneel when Aldric Cravenmoor passed her in the corridor. Some of the scars were new, only 6 months old, from the last time she had been lashed for the crime of helping 2 younger Omegas slip through the eastern gate on a night when they had been promised to wolves they did not want. The scars did not overlap. Aldric Cravenmoor was careful about that. He spaced each lash the width of a finger apart from the last, so that the record of every punishment was visible and legible on her back, like a ledger written in skin. He had told her once, in the quiet, measured voice he used when he was most pleased with himself, that her back was the finest record of discipline in the Northern Territories. He had told her that any pack alpha who saw it would understand what Cravenmoor expected of its Omegas. He had told her that she should be grateful for the precision. Other pack alphas would have laid the lashes down in a mess. Nessa had said nothing to that. She had learned that saying nothing was the only answer that did not add a new line to the ledger on her back. But she had not stopped defying him. That was the thing about Nessa that Aldric Cravenmoor could not break. No matter how many lashes he laid down on the brown skin of her back, she kept defying him. She kept looking him in the eye. She kept speaking out of turn. She kept helping the younger Omegas when she could, slipping them bread and warm clothes and whispering to them in the dark of the long, low sleeping hall where the Omegas were kept, telling them the things she had learned in her 10 years of being lashed, where the gaps in the eastern wall were, which guards drank too much on the cold nights, which paths through the black pine forest led to the territories of packs that were kinder than this one. Every time they caught her, they lashed her, and every time they lashed her, she healed, and she went back to the dark of the long, low sleeping hall, and she whispered the same things to the next group of younger Omegas who had been promised to wolves they did not want. The women in the sleeping hall called her the Scarred One. The pack guards called her the Marked Girl. Aldric Cravenmoor called her, with his quiet, measured pride, my finest work. Nessa called herself nothing. She did not need a title for what she was. She knew what she was. She was the girl who had been beaten 100 times and had not broken, and she did not need anyone to tell her what that made her. She was not tall. She stood 5 feet and 4 inches in her bare feet, and she was lean and hard from the thin rations and the long, cold winters. Her skin was a warm, deep brown, the brown of dark river clay in the summer, and her hair was black and thick and cut short to the line of her jaw, because long hair was a luxury that the lashed could not afford. Long hair caught in the lash on the downstroke and tore. Her eyes were dark brown, almost black, with a ring of deep amber around the pupils that showed only in the firelight. Her face was oval and strong-boned, with high cheekbones and a full mouth that had forgotten how to smile, and a small notch in her left eyebrow where a lash had caught the edge of her face on a bad day when she had turned at the wrong moment. She wore the grey wool shift that all the Omegas of Cravenmoor wore, belted at the waist with a strip of leather, and over the shift in the cold months, she wore a long, shapeless coat of undyed wool that came down past her knees. The coat was important. The coat covered her back. The coat was the only thing between her scars and the eyes of the world, and she wore it in all seasons, even in the brief, hot summers of the long gray valley, because the thought of anyone seeing the ledger on her back was worse than the heat. She had been wearing the coat on the morning when the Alpha King's courier had arrived at the gates of the Cravenmoor keep with the letter. The letter was written on heavy cream-colored paper and sealed with the silver wolf-head seal of the high seat of Greymarch, the seat of the Alpha King of the Northern Territories. The letter said, in the precise formal language of the old laws older than any pack, that the Cravenmoor pack owed a tribute to the high seat. The tribute was an old one, a law from the time before the packs had been unified, when the Alpha King had the right to demand from any pack in his territories a tribute of goods, of grain, of service, or of a bonding age Omega to be brought to the high seat and given the choice of whether to stay or return. The tribute had not been demanded in living memory. Most packs had forgotten it existed. But the law was still on the books, and the Alpha King had invoked it, and the Cravenmoor pack was required to comply. Aldric Cravenmoor had read the letter in the long, low hall of his keep, seated on the high seat with the locked iron case of the lash behind him, and a slow, careful smile had come over his thin, sharp face. He had called his second to the high seat and spoken to him in the low voice that his household knew to fear. "The Alpha King wants an Omega tribute from my pack. Very well, he will have one. Send the scarred one." His second had looked at him with a question in his eyes. "My lord, the scarred one, she is... The Alpha King will see her back." "Yes, he will. My lord, if the Alpha King sees what has been done to her..." "The Alpha King," Aldric Cravenmoor said quietly, "has demanded an Omega from my pack. The old law says I must send one. The old law does not say which one. I will send the one I choose. I will send the one whose back tells the whole of the Cravenmoor story to any wolf who has the stomach to look at it. And when the Alpha King sees what I have sent him, when he sees the 100 lashes on her back and the defiance still in her eyes, he will understand what Cravenmoor is. He will understand that I do not bend. He will understand that the wolves of the Eastern Reach are not the soft wolves of the high country. He will send her back. And when he sends her back, every pack in the Northern Territories will know that the Alpha King of Greymarch asked for a tribute from Aldric Cravenmoor and got nothing but a scarred girl and a lesson." His second had said nothing more. They had come for Nessa in the long, low sleeping hall at dawn the next morning. 2 pack guards had pulled back the thin wool blanket from her pallet and told her to stand. She had stood. They had told her she was being sent to the high seat of Greymarch as an Omega tribute to the Alpha King. She had looked at them with her dark brown eyes and said nothing. They had given her a small canvas pack with 2 days of bread and dried meat and a single change of the grey wool shift, and they had walked her to the eastern gate of the keep and put her on the back of a thin brown horse behind a single mounted escort. And they had sent her east on the long road through the Black Pine Valley toward the high seat of the Alpha King. She had not looked back at the keep as she rode away from it. There was nothing in the keep to look back at. The ride from Cravenmoor to the high seat of Greymarch took 4 days on the long eastern road. The escort was a single guard, a young pack-born wolf who did not speak to her and did not look at her and rode ahead of her thin brown horse at a steady pace, stopping at the small road inns at night and paying for a single room for himself and a space in the stable for her. Nessa did not mind the stable. The hay was warmer than the thin wool blanket on her pallet in the sleeping hall, and the horses were better company than the pack guards of Cravenmoor. On the 3rd night, at a small inn in a narrow valley where the black pines gave way to the broader gray-green pines of the high country, Nessa sat in the stable with her back against a bale of hay, and ate the last of the bread from the canvas pack and looked up through a crack in the stable roof at the cold winter stars. She thought about the Alpha King. She had heard the stories. Everyone in the Northern Territories had heard them. The Alpha King of Greymarch was called Fenric Greymarch, and he was 33 years old, and he had held the high seat for 7 years. The stories said he was very tall, very strong, with eyes the color of cold iron that could see through any lie. The stories said he was just. The stories said he was patient. The stories said he had refused to take a mate for 5 years because no wolf in any pack in the Northern Territories had moved him. Nessa did not believe the stories. She had spent 10 years in a pack ruled by a man called just by his own people, and the 100 lashes on her back showed what the word just meant in the mouths of powerful men. She expected to be brought before the Alpha King, expected him to ask her to remove the coat the way all Alpha Kings inspected their tributes, expected him to see the 100 lashes on her back and be disgusted, and expected him to send her back to Cravenmoor with the message that the tribute was not acceptable. And then Aldric Cravenmoor would lash her again, and the ledger on her back would gain a new line. That was what she expected. She did not expect what happened. The high seat of Greymarch stood on the eastern edge of the high plain, where the land rose from the long valleys into the broad, open country of wind and sky and pale winter grass. It was a great stone hold, built 200 years ago from the gray granite of the high plain, with thick walls and tall square towers and a long hall with 3 great hearths that could warm 100 wolves on the coldest night of winter. The hold was not beautiful in the way the mountain keeps of the old packs were beautiful. It was plain and strong and built to last, and it had lasted, and it would last. Nessa saw it from a distance of 3 miles, a gray shape on the high plain against the pale winter sky, and something in her chest went tight at the sight of it. Not hope. She did not have hope. Hope was a luxury she had stopped affording a long time ago. What went tight in her chest was a kind of bracing, the way a person braces when they know a blow is coming and they have decided to take it standing up. They arrived at the gates of the hold at midday on the 4th day. The gates were tall and made of heavy dark oak banded with iron, and they stood open. 2 guards in long gray coats with silver wolf head clasps stood at the gatehouse. The escort rode up to them, handed over the letter from Aldric Cravenmoor, and the guards read the letter and looked at the thin brown horse with the small woman in the shapeless, undyed wool coat on its back. And one of the guards spoke quietly into the gatehouse, and a runner was sent into the hold. Nessa sat on the thin brown horse in the cold wind of the high plain and waited. She did not dismount. She did not speak. She kept the shapeless coat pulled tight around her and her hands in her lap and her dark brown eyes on the gray stone of the gatehouse. And she waited to be told what to do, because that was what 10 years of the lash had taught her, that the safest thing to do in any new place was to wait and to watch and to say nothing until she understood the rules. The runner came back after a quarter of an hour. He was a young man in a gray wool tunic, and he spoke to the escort, and then he turned to Nessa with a face that was not unkind. "You are the Omega tribute from Cravenmoor." "I am." "The king is in the long hall. He has been told of your arrival. Will you come inside? There is a fire and a meal waiting for you." A fire and a meal waiting for her. Nessa looked at the young runner's face for a long moment. In the Cravenmoor keep, a new arrival was taken to the inspection hall, stripped to the waist, and examined for fitness. In the Cravenmoor keep, a fire and a meal were earned, not offered. "Yes," she said, "I will come inside." She slid down from the thin brown horse and followed the runner through the tall oak gates and into the great stone hold of Greymarch. The hold was as she had expected, plain, strong, well kept. The entry court was broad and paved with flat gray stones, swept clean of snow, with a row of stables along the east wall and a forge and a wood store along the west wall. Servants moved through the court in warm wool clothes, not the thin gray shifts of the Cravenmoor Omegas, but proper coats and boots and scarves against the cold. They looked at her as she passed, and their looks were curious but not hostile. She kept her eyes forward, and her coat pulled tight, and followed the runner. He led her through a heavy oak door and into a long stone corridor lit by iron brackets of candles, and then through a second door into the long hall of Greymarch. The long hall was warm. That was the first thing she noticed. 3 great hearths burned along the east wall, and the heat of them came at her in a slow wave as she stepped through the door, and she felt her cold body lean into the warmth the way a starving thing leans toward food. The hall was high-ceilinged and broad, with carved stone pillars running down the center and long wooden tables laid with clean white cloth and benches along both sides. At the far end of the hall, on a low stone platform, stood the high seat of Greymarch, a carved chair of gray granite, plain and undecorated, built for a large man. The large man was in it. Fenric Greymarch, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, was sitting on the high seat of his hall with one leg crossed over the other and a leather-bound book open on his knee. He looked up when the runner entered with Nessa behind him, and the book was closed and set aside in a single unhurried motion, and he rose from the high seat. He was very tall. That was the first thing Nessa noticed about him, the way it was always the first thing anyone noticed about the Alpha King. He stood 6 feet and 5 inches, broad-shouldered and heavily built, with the long, lean muscle of a wolf who ran his own patrols. His hair was dark brown, the color of deep river wood, cropped close to his head on the sides, but left longer on top and falling in a heavy wave across his forehead. His face was broad and strong-boned, a wide jaw, a heavy brow, a twice-broken nose that had healed slightly crooked, and a short, thick, dark beard trimmed close to the jaw. His eyes were the color of cold iron, a dark gray so deep it was almost black, steady and level and impossible to read. He wore a long coat of dark gray wool lined with black wolf fur, a black tunic beneath, dark trousers, and heavy black boots. A simple iron ring was on the 3rd finger of his left hand. Not a bonding ring, but the ring of the high seat, the ring that every Alpha King wore. There was no crown, no chain of office, no visible weapon. The authority was in the man. It did not need decoration. He came down the 3 stone steps from the high seat with the slow, heavy stride of a man who did not hurry for anyone, and he stopped at the foot of the steps, 6 paces from where Nessa stood in her shapeless, undyed wool coat with the thin canvas pack over her shoulder and the dust of 4 days on the road on her boots, and he looked at her. He looked at her for a long time. His dark iron-gray eyes moved over her face slowly. Her dark brown skin, her short black hair cut to the jaw, her dark brown eyes with the ring of deep amber around the pupils, the small notch in her left eyebrow, the full mouth that had forgotten how to smile. He did not look at her body. He did not look at her coat. He looked at her face, and his own face did not change. And when he finally spoke, his voice was low and quiet and level, the voice of a man who had learned a long time ago that the most important things are said in the softest tones. "You are the Omega tribute from Cravenmoor." It was not a question, but she answered it. "I am, my king." "What is your name?" The question surprised her. In the Cravenmoor keep, no one asked an Omega's name. An Omega's name was irrelevant. An Omega was a function, not a person. "Nessa, my king." "Nessa." He said her name once quietly as if he were committing it to memory. "Nessa of Cravenmoor, you have been 4 days on the road. You are cold and you are tired and you have not been fed properly. I can see that from here." He turned his head slightly and spoke to the runner. "Bring a meal to the South Tower room, the large one with the hearth. A full meal, soup, bread, meat, something hot to drink, and send Marin up. Tell Marin I want her to attend our guest." "Our guest." Nessa stood very still in the long, warm hall of Greymarch and heard the words "our guest" come out of the mouth of the Alpha King, and the tight thing in her chest did something she had not expected. It loosened, just slightly, just enough for her to feel the loosening, the way a person feels the first crack in a frozen river, the tiny sound of ice beginning to give. "Come," Fenric Greymarch said. "I will take you to your room myself. You do not need to stand in this hall and be looked at. You have been looked at enough." She followed him. He led her out of the long hall through a side door and up a broad stone staircase that curved through the interior of the south tower. He walked ahead of her on the stairs, and she walked behind him, and she watched the broad back of his gray wool coat as they climbed. And she noticed that he walked at her pace. He did not climb at the pace of a tall, strong alpha king. He climbed at the pace of a small, tired woman who had been 4 days on a thin horse on a winter road. He had slowed without being asked and without making it obvious. And something about the quietness of that courtesy made the tight thing in her chest loosen a little more. The room was on the 3rd floor of the south tower. It was a large room, larger than the entire sleeping hall of the Cravenmoor Omega quarters, with a broad bed against one wall, a hearth on the opposite wall already laid and lit, a tall, narrow window looking east over the high plain, and a heavy wooden door with a bolt on the inside. Fenric Greymarch stopped at the door. He did not cross the threshold. "This is your room, Nessa. The bolt is on the inside. It is yours to use. No one will enter this room without your permission. I will not enter this room without your permission. Marin will come up in a moment. She is the healer of this hold, and she is a good woman, and she will want to see that you are well. You may send her away if you wish. You may send anyone away if you wish. You are a guest in this hold, and a guest has the right to her own door." She looked at him. She looked at the tall, broad man in the doorway of the warm room with the lit fire and the broad bed and the bolt on the inside of the door, and she tried to find the thing she was expecting to find. She tried to find the cruelty. She tried to find the angle. She tried to find the thing that every powerful man she had ever known had hidden behind the first show of courtesy, the thing that always came out later, the thing that always had teeth. She could not find it. "Why?" she said. Her voice was rough from 4 days of silence on the road. "Why are you being kind to me? You do not know me. You do not know what I have done. You do not know what is on my back." Something changed in his dark iron-gray eyes. Not a flinch, not a startle. Something deeper, a slow, careful attention, the way a man looks when he has just heard a sentence that tells him more than the speaker intended. "I do not need to know what is on your back to know that you deserve a warm room and a meal and a door that bolts from the inside," he said quietly. "Whatever is on your back, Nessa of Cravenmoor, it was put there by someone who had no right to put it there. That is all I need to know tonight. The rest can wait. Rest now." He inclined his head to her, the small, quiet inclination that was not a bow, but something close to it, and he turned and went down the broad stone staircase, and Nessa stood in the doorway of the warm room on the 3rd floor of the south tower and listened to his heavy footsteps fade down the stairs, and then she went inside and closed the door and pushed the bolt into its iron bracket, and she stood there with her hand on the bolt for a long time. Then she sat down on the edge of the broad bed and pulled the shapeless, undyed wool coat tighter around her shoulders and looked at the fire in the hearth. And she did not cry, because she had not cried in a very long time, but the tight thing in her chest that had loosened twice in the last hour loosened again, and for the first time in 10 years she felt the small, dangerous thing that she had trained herself to never feel. She felt safe. Marin came up the stairs a quarter of an hour later. She knocked first. That alone was enough to make Nessa's breath catch, because in the Cravenmoor keep, no one knocked before entering an Omega's quarters. Marin knocked and waited, and when Nessa opened the door, the woman standing in the corridor was not what she had expected. Marin was in her middle 50s, a short, broad woman with silver-streaked red hair pulled back in a practical knot and a broad, kind face weathered by years of wind on the high plain. Her eyes were a warm brown. She wore a clean wool dress of dark green under a heavy apron, and she carried a leather satchel over one shoulder and a wooden tray in both hands. "I am Marin," she said, "the healer of this hold. The king asked me to bring you a meal and to see that you are well. May I come in?" "May I come in?" Nessa stepped back from the door and let her in. Marin set the wooden tray on the small table beside the bed. On the tray was a clay bowl of thick barley soup still steaming, a round of dark bread, a slab of roasted venison, a small pot of honey, a clay mug of hot cider. Nessa looked at the tray, and the smell of the food hit her stomach, and she felt the saliva come into her mouth so fast that it hurt. She had eaten nothing but dry bread and dried meat for 4 days, and nothing but thin gruel and hard bread for the 10 years before that. "Eat," Marin said gently. "Eat first. We can talk after." Nessa sat on the edge of the bed and ate. She ate the way a person eats who has been hungry for a long time, not fast, not desperately, but with the careful, steady attention of a woman who had learned to eat slowly because she never knew when the food would be taken away. She ate the soup and the bread and the venison, and she drank the hot cider, and the warmth of it went down into her and filled the places that had been empty for a long time. And when she was finished, she set the empty clay mug on the tray and folded her hands in her lap and looked at the healer. "Thank you," she said. "You are welcome, child." Marin sat down on the small wooden chair beside the hearth and set her leather satchel on the floor at her feet and looked at Nessa with the steady, warm eyes of a woman who had been tending wounds for 30 years. "The king tells me you have come from Cravenmoor. He tells me you have been 4 days on the road. He tells me you are thin and cold and tired, and that he would like me to see that you are well. I am well! You are thin as a winter deer, child, and the bones of your wrists are showing through your coat sleeves. And you have not been well fed in a long time. Those are the things I can see. Are there things I cannot see?" Nessa was silent for a long moment. She looked at the healer's face. She looked at the warm brown eyes and the weathered skin, and the practical silver-streaked red hair and the kind set of the broad mouth. She looked for the thing she always looked for. She looked for the angle. "You want to see my back," she said flatly. Marin's expression did not change. "I want to see whatever you are willing to show me, child. If there are things on your back that need tending, I would like to tend them. If you are not ready to show me, I will wait." The king did not tell me what to expect. He told me only that you are our guest and that you are to be treated with the same care he would want for any member of his own household. Nessa looked at her for a long time. The fire crackled in the hearth. The wind pressed against the tall, narrow window. The bolt was in the door. No one was going to come through that door unless she opened it. She stood up from the edge of the bed. She turned her back to the healer. She reached up to the collar of the shapeless, undyed wool coat, and she hesitated for one long breath, and then she pulled the coat down off her shoulders and let it fall to her waist. Beneath the coat, she wore the thin gray wool shift of the Cravenmoor Omegas. She pulled the shift down off her shoulders too, and she stood there with her bare back to the healer and her arms folded across her chest and the cold air of the room on her exposed skin, and she did not turn around, and she did not say anything. She let the healer see. The room was very quiet for a long time. Marin did not gasp. She did not make a sound. But Nessa could hear the quality of the silence change. The way silence changes when a person is looking at something that requires all of their attention to hold steady. The way silence changes when a person is choosing very carefully what to say next because the wrong word will break something that cannot be repaired. "How many?" Marin said at last. Her voice was the same steady voice it had been before, but there was something underneath it that was not steady at all. 100. He counted them. He was proud of the count. Another long silence. "May I touch you, child?" "Yes." Marin's hands were warm. They were the warm, dry hands of a healer who had touched 1,000 wounds in her time, and they moved over the raised white ridges on Nessa's brown skin with the light, careful pressure of a woman who knew that some scars carried memories in them and that the wrong touch could bring the memories back. She touched each scar from the top of Nessa's shoulders to the base of her spine, and she did not speak while she touched them, and Nessa stood very still with her arms folded across her chest and her eyes on the stone wall in front of her, and she counted her breaths the way she always counted her breaths when someone was looking at her back, and she waited for it to be over. "Some of these are old," Marin said quietly. "Some of these were laid down on a child. The first ones were laid down when I was 12, and the newest, 6 months ago." Marin's hand stopped moving on her back. The healer was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was very controlled. "I have a salve that will help with the tightness. The newer scars will soften over time. The older ones are set, but the salve will ease the pull of them. I will leave it with you. You may use it yourself, or you may ask me to apply it. That is your choice." "Thank you." "I am going to tell the king what I have seen, Nessa. He will want to know." Nessa pulled the shift and the coat back up over her shoulders and turned around to face the healer. "I know he will. Everyone wants to know. Everyone always wants to see what Aldric Cravenmoor has done to his Omegas." "That is not why the king will want to know," Marin said quietly. The king will want to know because the king believes that the things that are done to Omegas in the packs of the Northern Territories are his responsibility to answer for. The king will want to know because the king has been waiting for a reason to ride to the Cravenmoor Valley, and you have just given him one." Nessa looked at the healer. Something in the healer's words had reached through the 10 years of armor she had built around herself and touched a small, tender place underneath that she had forgotten was there. "He has been waiting," she said slowly, "for a reason. The king has heard rumors about Cravenmoor for years, child. Rumors of the lash, rumors of the way the Omegas are kept. But rumors are not proof, and the old laws require proof before the High Seat can act against a pack alpha. The old laws are very particular about proof." Marin looked at her steadily. "Your back is proof, Nessa. Your back is 100 lines of proof." Nessa sat down on the edge of the bed. She sat very still with her hands in her lap and her dark brown eyes on the fire in the hearth and the tight thing in her chest, the thing that had been loosening all afternoon. Slowly and painfully, like a muscle that has been clenched for so long it has forgotten how to release. Loosened one more notch. She had been sent here as an insult. Aldric Cravenmoor had sent her scarred back as a message to the Alpha King. A message that said, "I do not bend." A message that said, "My wolves are hard wolves." A message that said, "You asked for a tribute and I gave you nothing but my finest work." And the Alpha King had looked at her face and had not asked to see her back. And the healer had looked at her back and had called it proof. And the tight thing in her chest was beginning to understand that the message Aldric Cravenmoor had sent to the Alpha King was not the message the Alpha King had received. The message the Alpha King had received was 100 reasons to ride to the Cravenmoor Valley. The days that followed were the strangest of Nessa's life. She had expected to be inspected, assessed, put to work, assigned to a sleeping hall. She had expected the brief courtesy to end within the first day and the real rules to appear. The rules she knew, the rules that told her where to stand and when to lower her eyes. The real rules did not appear. On the second day, she woke in the broad bed and lay for a long time listening to the silence. The fire had burned to coals, but the room was still warm. The bolt was still in the door. She washed her face in the copper basin and pulled on the clean gray wool dress that had been folded on the chair by the bed. Not the thin shift of the Cravenmoor Omegas, but a proper dress, warm and well made, with long sleeves that came down to her wrists. A knock came at the door. "Nessa, it is Marin. There is breakfast in the long hall if you would like to come down." She opened the door. Marin was standing in the corridor with a small smile on her weathered face. "Will the king be in the long hall?" "He is. He takes his breakfast there every morning. You are welcome to sit where you wish. There is no assigned seating in this hall, child." Nessa went down to the long hall with Marin. The hall was half full of household wolves and servants and guards eating their breakfast at the long wooden tables. The 3 great hearths were burning. The room was warm and loud with the sound of conversation and the clink of clay bowls and the scrape of benches on stone. Fenric Greymarch was at the high table on the low stone platform at the far end of the hall. He was eating a bowl of porridge and reading the leather-bound book she had seen the day before. He looked up when Nessa entered the hall with Marin, and his dark iron-gray eyes found her across the room, and he inclined his head to her in the small, quiet greeting that she was beginning to learn was the way he acknowledged a person's presence without demanding their attention. She sat at one of the long tables near the middle of the hall. A servant brought her a bowl of porridge with honey and cream and a round of warm bread and a clay mug of hot cider, and she ate, and no one stared at her, and no one asked her to lower her eyes, and no one called her the scarred one or the marked girl or my finest work. After breakfast, she did not know what to do. In the Cravenmoor Keep, every hour of an Omega's day was accounted for. Cleaning, carrying, fetching, kneeling, standing at attention, being inspected. Here there was nothing. No one told her where to go. No one told her what to do. She stood in the entry court of the hold in the cold, bright morning air and looked up at the pale winter sky over the high plain and felt the strange, bewildering sensation of a woman who has been given her own hours back and has forgotten what to do with them. She She walked through the hold, learning its shape the way she had learned every place she had been kept, where the exits were, where the guards stood, which doors were locked and which were open. She walked through the kitchens where the kitchen women offered her broth, through the stables, through the small walled garden at the eastern side, where the winter earth was hard and bare, but where she could see the shapes of stone-bordered beds that would be full of flowers in the spring. No one stopped her. No one asked where she was going. The hold was open to her in a way no place had ever been, and the openness was almost harder to bear than the cage of Cravenmoor, because a cage at least tells you where the walls are, and here there were no walls. On the third day, Fenric Greymarch spoke to her. She was sitting in the small walled garden on a stone bench in the weak winter sun, her shapeless coat pulled around her, her dark brown eyes on the bare earth of the flower beds. She heard his footsteps on the stone path, the slow, heavy tread she was beginning to recognize, and she looked up and saw him coming through the low, arched entrance of the garden with a clay mug of something hot in each hand. "I thought you might like something warm," he said. "The garden is cold in winter." He held out one of the mugs. She took it. It was hot cider, spiced with cloves. She wrapped her cold hands around the warm clay and looked up at him. "May I sit?" he asked. She nodded. He sat on the stone bench beside her. He was very large on the stone bench. His broad shoulders and his long coat took up most of the space, and she was very aware of the size of him next to the smallness of her, and she waited for the size to feel threatening, and it did not. It felt like sitting beside a wall that the wind could not get through. They sat in silence for a moment. He drank from his mug. She drank from hers. The cold winter wind moved across the top of the garden wall and stirred the dead stalks of last summer's flowers. "Marn has told me what she saw," he said at last. His voice was quiet. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the bare earth of the garden. "She has told me about your back. She has told me about the 100 scars. She has told me what you told her, that they began when you were 12. Nessa's hands tightened on the clay mug. She said nothing. "I am not going to ask you to show me, Nessa. I am not going to ask you to tell me the story of every scar. Those stories are yours. They do not belong to me. They do not belong to anyone but you." He turned his great dark head and looked at her, and his dark iron gray eyes were steady and clear, and there was something in them that she had not seen in the eyes of any powerful man in her 22 years. "But I am going to tell you something, and I want you to hear it." She looked at him. "Aldric Cravenmoor sent you to me as an insult. He sent you because he wanted me to see your back and be disgusted and send you back to him. And he wanted every pack in the Northern Territories to know that he had answered my tribute demand with a scarred girl and a lesson in who bends and who does not." He paused. "I know this because I know Aldric Cravenmoor. I know the kind of man he is. I have known the kind of man he is for 5 years, and I have been waiting for proof, because the old laws require proof before the high seat can act, and the old laws are very particular." He turned back to the garden. His voice did not change. It stayed low and quiet and level, but there was something underneath the level voice that was not level at all, something that was very large and very old and very patient and very angry, the way the deep water of a river is angry when it finally finds the crack in the dam. "Your back is proof, Nessa. I do not say this to use you. I say this because you should know that the 100 scars on your back are not the message Aldric Cravenmoor thinks they are. He thinks they say I do not bend. He thinks they say my wolves are hard. He thinks they say the Alpha King asked for a tribute and got a scarred girl and a lesson. That is not what they say. What they say is that a pack alpha in my territories has been lashing an omega since she was 12 years old, and the omega did not break, and the pack alpha was too stupid to understand that the unbroken omega is not a message about his strength. She is a message about hers." Nessa's hands were shaking on the clay mug. She tightened her grip to keep the shaking from showing, and she could not. The hot cider trembled in the mug. "I have sent riders to the Cravenmoor Valley this morning," he said. "They carry a summons. Aldric Cravenmoor will present himself at the high seat of Greymarch within the month to answer for the treatment of the Omegas in his pack. He will bring the full records of his keep. He will bring the lash. He will bring the names of every Omega who has been lashed in the last 23 years of his rule. And when he arrives at my gates, the old laws will do what the old laws were written to do." He looked at her again. The dark iron-gray eyes held hers. "You're not going back to Cravenmoor, Nessa. Not today, not ever. Whatever Aldric Cravenmoor intended when he put you on that horse, the thing he has actually done is give you to the one place in the Northern Territories where no one will ever lash you again. You are under my protection from this hour forward, and my protection does not have conditions, and it does not have an expiration, and it does not require anything from you in return." She could not speak. The tight thing in her chest that had been loosening slowly over the past 3 days finally broke open, and the breaking was not gentle. It was the kind of breaking that happens when a thing that has been frozen for 10 years finally cracks all the way through, and the water underneath comes up all at once, and there is no stopping it. She cried. She had not cried in 10 years. She had not cried since the 5th lashing, when she decided crying meant the guards saw weakness, and weakness meant more lashes. She had built a wall around the crying, and kept it up through 95 more lashes, through the long, cold nights, through the whispering to the younger Omegas in the dark, through the 4 cold days on the thin horse. The wall had held for 10 years. The wall came down in the garden. She cried with her whole body. She cried the way a person cries who has been saving it for a decade, the way a frozen river cries when the spring comes and the ice breaks all at once. She bent over the clay mug in her hands, and her shoulders shook, and the tears ran down her brown face and onto her hands and into the hot cider, and she could not stop. Fenric Greymarch did not touch her. He sat beside her on the stone bench in the cold-walled garden, and he did not put his arm around her, and he did not take her hand, and he did not say a word. He sat with her. He let her cry. He was a wall that the wind could not get through, and he gave her the space to break in the shelter of him without ever crossing the distance between them. She did not know how long she cried. A long time. The hot cider went cold in the mug. The weak winter sun moved across the garden wall. The dead stalks of last summer's flowers swayed in the wind. She cried until she was empty, and then she sat very still on the stone bench with her face wet and her hands cold and her chest hollow and aching, and she breathed. "I am sorry," she said. "Do not be sorry for that," he said quietly. "That was 10 years of crying. It needed to come out." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She looked at him sideways, and something about his broad, calm face and his level, dark, iron-gray eyes and the patient stillness of his great body on the stone bench made her mouth do a thing it had not done in a very long time. She smiled. It was not a large smile. It was not even a full smile. It was a small, crooked thing, half-formed and uncertain, the way a smile looks on a face that has forgotten the mechanics of it. But it was there, and it was real, and Fenric Greymarch saw it, and something in his dark iron-gray eyes shifted, and the ring of molten amber around his pupils, the ring she had not noticed before, the ring that only showed in certain lights, flared softly for one brief moment, and then he looked away toward the garden wall, and the small, quiet expression on his broad face was the expression of a man who had just seen something he had not expected to see and who needed a moment to steady himself. "I should go inside," she said. "The cold is getting in." "I will walk with you, if you will let me." "I will let you." They walked back through the low, arched entrance of the garden and across the entry court and into the hold, and they did not touch, and they did not speak, and the distance between them was the distance between two people who have begun to understand something about each other but are not yet ready to name it. The weeks that followed were a slow education in what it meant to be free. Nessa learned the hold of Greymarch the way a cautious animal learns a new territory. One room at a time, one corridor at a time, one careful step at a time. She learned that the kitchen women would give her food whenever she asked and sometimes when she did not. She learned that the hold had a small library on the 2nd floor of the East Tower, and that the library was open to anyone, and that she could sit there for hours in the warm leather chair beside the window and read the old books of the high country without anyone asking her what she was doing or telling her she did not have permission. She learned that Marin came to check on her every few days, bringing the salve for her scars and a quiet conversation and a cup of spiced hot cider. She learned that Marin had been the healer of Greymarch for 28 years, and that the steady warmth in the healer's brown eyes was not an act, but the real thing. She learned that Fenric took his breakfast in the long hall every morning, with the leather-bound book of old laws on his knee. She learned that he held court on the 3rd day of every week, and that the Omegas who came before him were treated with the same courtesy as pack-born wolves. She learned that he walked the walls of the hold every evening at sunset, alone, and that he paused at the eastern wall to look out over the high plain in the direction of the Cravenmoor Valley. And the set of his jaw when he looked east was the set of a man counting the days until a reckoning. She learned that she was beginning to look for him. She did not mean to. She did not plan it. But she found herself on the 7th day, looking up from her book in the library when she heard the heavy tread of boots on the stone stair. She found herself on the 10th day sitting in the walled garden at the hour when he usually came through the low, arched entrance with 2 mugs of cider. She found herself on the 14th day taking her breakfast at the table nearest the high table on the low stone platform, not because she wanted to sit near him, but because the long hall felt more settled when she could see him in the corner of her eye, eating his porridge and reading his book about the old laws. She found that his presence did not make her flinch. She had spent 10 years flinching, at doors opening too fast, at hands raised near her, at the sound of leather drawn through a hand. She did not flinch at Fenric Greymarch. Something in the quietness of the way he moved told her body what her mind had not yet decided, that this man was not the kind who laid down lashes. This man rode to the places where lashes were laid down and stopped them. On the 18th day, he asked her to walk with him on the walls at sunset. She said yes. They walked the western wall of the hold in the cold red light of the winter sunset. The high plain spread out below them in a sheet of pale gold snow, the distant mountains dark against the fading sky. He walked slowly, matching his long stride to her short one, and his hands were clasped behind his back, and his dark, iron-gray eyes were on the horizon. Nessa. Yes? Aldric Cravenmoor is 3 days from the gates. My riders brought word this morning. He is coming with a retinue of 20 wolves and the records of his keep. He is coming because he has no choice. The summons of the high seat carries the force of the old laws, and to refuse the summons is to forfeit his pack. She was quiet for a moment. The wind pressed against her face. The shapeless coat flapped at her knees. What will happen to him? He will stand in my hall and answer for what he has done. The old laws are clear. A pack alpha who uses the lash on an omega without the sanction of a lawful council is in violation of the codes of the high seat. A pack alpha who lashes a child is in violation of the deeper codes. A pack alpha who has laid 100 lashes on a single omega over the span of 10 years, beginning when she was 12, is not merely in violation. He is forfeit. Forfeit. His pack will be dissolved. His title will be stripped. His lands will be redistributed to the surrounding packs. His omegas will be freed and given the choice of where to go. And Aldric Cravenmoor himself will live out the rest of his days in a holding cell at the bottom of this hold, where he will have a small room with a stone bed and a bolt on the outside of the door, and he will understand what it feels like to be kept. Nessa stopped walking. She stood on the western wall of the hold in the cold red light and looked at the Alpha King, and the wind was in her short black hair, and the last of the sunset was on her face, and the thing in her dark brown eyes was not gratitude. It was something harder and older and fiercer than gratitude. I want to be there, she said. When he stands in your hall, I want to be there. You will be there. I want him to see my face. He will see your face, Nessa, and he will see that the face has not been broken. They stood on the wall together in the cold red light, and the distance between them was smaller than it had been 3 weeks ago, and the wind could not get through him, and she was beginning to understand that the wall beside her was not a wall she needed to be afraid of. The wall beside her was a wall she could lean against. Aldric Cravenmoor arrived at the gates of Greymarch on a grey morning 3 days later. Nessa watched from the window of the south tower room as the retinue came up the road from the south, 20 wolves on dark horses, and at their head a tall, lean man in a long black coat on a tall black horse. She could not see his face at that distance, but she did not need to. She knew the shape of him, the way a person knows the shape of the thing that has hurt them. She knew the straight, stiff back and the precise posture and the way he held his chin up, always up, because Aldric Cravenmoor believed the world was below him and his chin was angled to match. She felt the old fear come up in her like cold water. 10 years of fear did not disappear in 3 weeks of kindness. The fear was in her bones. The fear was in the scars on her back. The scars pulled tight across her shoulders the way they always pulled tight when the fear came, and she pressed her hands flat against the cold stone of the windowsill and breathed. She breathed the way Marin had taught her to breathe, slowly from the belly, counting the breaths. She breathed until the fear was still there, but she was standing on top of it instead of underneath it. Then she put on the clean gray wool dress and the long coat, and she went down the broad stone staircase to the long hall of Greymarch. The long hall was full. The household wolves of Greymarch lined the long tables on both sides of the hall in their gray coats with their silver wolf head clasps. The 3 great hearths were burning. Fenric Greymarch was on the high seat in his long coat of dark grey wool with the black wolf fur lining, and the iron ring of the high seat was on his hand, and the leather-bound book of the old laws was open on the arm of the chair. Torben, the king's second, a tall, lean man with cropped iron-grey hair and steady blue eyes, stood at the foot of the 3 stone steps to the high seat with his hands behind his back. Maren was there too, standing quietly near the eastern hearth with her leather satchel over her shoulder. Nessa took her place. She stood at the right side of the high seat, 1 step down from the king, where Fenric had asked her to stand. She stood there in her clean grey wool dress and her shapeless coat, with her short black hair and her dark brown eyes and the small notch in her left eyebrow, and she watched the great oak doors at the far end of the hall open. Aldric Cravenmoor walked into the long hall of Greymarch. He was exactly as she remembered him, tall and lean and precise, thin, sharp face, pale blue ice eyes, mouth a straight, thin line. His long black coat was buttoned to the throat with silver clasps. He walked with the stride of a man who believed everyone in the room was below him. Then his pale blue eyes found Nessa beside the high seat, and his stride faltered for 1/2 step, and the thin straight line of his mouth changed the way a man's face changes when a tool he has used for 10 years appears in someone else's hand. He recovered. The measured stride resumed. He came to a stop at the foot of the 3 stone steps 10 paces from where Nessa stood, and he inclined his head to the Alpha King. "My king, I have come as summoned." Fenric Greymarch did not rise from the high seat. He closed the leather-bound book of the old laws. He set it on the arm of the chair. He looked at Aldric Cravenmoor with the dark iron-grey eyes that could see through any lie, and the ring of molten amber around his pupils was burning very quietly, and the temperature in the long hall seemed to drop. "Cravenmoor, you sent an Omega tribute to my hold 3 weeks ago, a young woman called Nessa." "I did, my king, as the old law requires." "You sent her on a thin horse with a single escort and 2 days of bread. You sent her in a thin grey shift and a shapeless coat with no proper clothing and no proper shoes. You sent her after 22 years in your keep, 10 of which were spent under the lash." Aldric Cravenmoor's face did not change. "The Omegas of my pack are disciplined according to the codes of the Cravenmoor keep. The lash is a tool of correction, not of cruelty. It is applied with precision and restraint. The Omega Nessa was lashed for repeated acts of defiance and insubordination. She was first lashed at the age of 12. The codes of the Cravenmoor keep do not exempt children from correction. 100 lashes? Cravenmoor, 100 lashes on a single Omega, from the age of 12 to the age of 22, laid down with what you call precision, laid down with what your healer called a ledger." Fenric Greymarch rose from the high seat. He rose slowly the way a great dark thing rises from a long, still place, and the whole hall felt the weight of him as he came to his full height of 6.5 feet, and the heavy fall of his dark grey coat settled around him, and the iron ring of the high seat caught the firelight. "The old laws are clear. The lash may only be applied with the sanction of a lawful council. You have no such record. No child under 16 may be subjected to the lash. You lashed Nessa at 12. 100 lashes without council sanction, beginning in childhood, constitutes brutality, and brutality by a pack alpha against the Omegas in his care is forfeit. Forfeit. Your pack is dissolved, Cravenmoor. Your title is stripped. Your lands will be redistributed. Your Omegas will be freed and given the choice of where to go, and you will remain in the holding cells of this hold for the rest of your natural life." The long hall was very quiet. Aldric Cravenmoor's thin, sharp face had gone white. His pale blue eyes moved from the Alpha King to Nessa, standing at the right side of the high seat, and the look in them was the look of a man who has finally understood that the scarred girl he sent as an insult has become the instrument of his ruin. "Take him," Fenric Greymarch said. Torben moved. The king's second and 4 household guards came forward and took Aldric Cravenmoor by the arms, and the thin, sharp man in the long black coat did not resist, and he did not speak, and the last thing Nessa saw before the guards took him through the small door at the side of the hall, was his pale blue eyes still fixed on her face with the bewildered fury of a man who has spent 23 years believing that the lash makes the law and has just discovered that it does not. The great oak doors of the long hall closed. Fenric Greymarch looked at Nessa. She looked at him. The hall was silent. The 3 great hearths crackled. The household wolves of Greymarch sat very still on their benches and watched the small, scarred woman beside the high seat and the great dark king above her, and the distance between them was the distance of 1 stone step, and neither of them crossed it. "It is done," he said quietly. "It is done," she said. She did not cry. She had cried in the garden 3 weeks ago, and the 10 years of crying had come out then, and she did not need to cry again for this. What she felt was not relief and not joy and not vengeance. It was something quieter. It was the feeling of a door closing behind her. The last door, the one she had been walking toward for 10 years, and the sound of the bolt sliding home, and the knowledge that the door would not open again. The weeks after Aldric Cravenmoor's judgment were a different kind of education. The first education had been learning what it meant to be free. The second education was harder. The second education was learning what it meant to be wanted. She began to notice things about Fenric Greymarch that she had not allowed herself to notice before. She noticed that the ring of molten amber around his dark iron-gray pupils flared brighter when he looked at her. Not always, not predictably, but in certain moments when she turned a corner and found him in the corridor, or when she looked up from her book in the library and caught his eyes on her from across the room. She noticed that his wolf was closer to the surface when she was near him. She could feel it the way a person feels a change in the weather, a subtle shift in the air around him, a heaviness, a warmth, as if the great dark wolf inside his chest was pressing closer to the wall of him, trying to see through to her. She noticed that he never touched her. In all the weeks she had been in the hold, he had never once laid his hand on her arm, or her shoulder, or her back. He handed her the mug of cider with the careful distance of a man who understood what touch meant to a woman who had been touched by the lash for 10 years. He kept his great hands at his sides, or clasped behind his back, or wrapped around his own mug, and the restraint in him was not awkwardness. It was precision. It was the precision of a man who had decided that the first touch would be hers to give, and that he would wait for it, no matter how long the waiting took. She noticed that she wanted to touch him. The wanting came on slowly, the way the spring came on in the high country. Not all at once, not in a rush, but in small, careful increments, a degree at a time, until one day she was standing in the walled garden in the thin, pale light of a late winter afternoon, and she saw him come through the low, arched entrance with the 2 mugs of cider. And the wanting was there in her chest like a small, warm coal, and she understood what it was, and she did not push it away. On the evening of the 6th week, she did the thing she had been building toward. They were sitting in the small library on the 2nd floor of the East Tower. Fenric was in the large leather chair beside the fire with the book of old laws open on his knee. Nessa was in the smaller chair on the other side of the hearth with a cup of Marin's spiced cider in her hands. The fire was low, the evening was quiet, the wind was pressing against the tall, narrow window, and the snow was falling in the dark outside. "Fenric." He looked up from the book. His dark iron-gray eyes found hers across the hearth. The ring of molten amber was there, burning softly. "Yes, I want to show you something." She set the cup of cider on the small table beside her chair. She stood up. She faced away from him. She reached up to the collar of the clean gray wool dress she wore now, the dress that covered her from throat to wrists to ankles, the dress that hid the ledger on her back the way the shapeless coat had hidden it before, and she undid the top button, and then the next, and then the next, and she pulled the dress down off her shoulders to her waist. She was wearing a thin white linen shift beneath. She pulled the shift down too. She stood with her bare back to the Alpha King of the Northern Territories in the warm light of the library fire, and the 100 scars on her back were lit by the orange glow of the flames, and the raised white ridges on her brown skin ran in their careful parallel lines from her shoulders to her spine, and she stood very still, and she did not turn around. The library was silent, the fire crackled, the snow fell against the window. She heard him set the book down on the arm of the chair. She heard the leather creak as he rose. She heard his heavy footsteps cross the stone floor. She felt the warmth of him come up behind her, not touching, not yet, but close enough that she could feel the heat of his body through the cold air between them. Close enough that she could feel the wolf inside him pressing against the wall of his chest, pressing closer, pressing toward her. He was behind her. She could feel the slow, heavy rhythm of his breathing. She could feel the restrained power of him, the size of him, the great quiet weight of a man who could have taken anything he wanted from anyone in the Northern Territories, and who stood behind her now with his hands at his sides and waited for her to tell him what she needed. "This is what they did to me," she said. Her voice was steady. She had practiced this in her mind 100 times. She had practiced the steadiness. "This is the ledger he was so proud of. 100 lashes, 12 to 22, every one of them for the crime of not breaking." Silence. "May I look?" he said. "You are looking." "May I look closer?" She nodded. She felt him come closer. She felt the warmth of him draw nearer until he was standing close enough that if she leaned back, she would have touched his chest. She felt the careful, controlled breath of the wolf inside him as his eyes moved over the scars on her back. She felt the quality of the air change between them. Not with horror, not with disgust, not with the revulsion she had spent 10 years expecting from anyone who saw the ledger. The air changed with something else, something she had not expected. Reverence. "Nessa," he said, and his voice was very low and very rough and very quiet. "Nessa, will you let me do something?" "What?" "Will you let me touch them?" Her breath caught. The small, warm coal in her chest flared. Yes. His hands were warm. That was the first thing she felt, the warmth of his great hands and the gentleness of them, and the way they trembled. The Alpha King's hands were trembling, the hands that had held a sword and held a council and held the old laws older than any pack were trembling as they came to rest on the first scar at the top of her right shoulder. And the touch was so light that it was barely there, and it was the first time a man had touched her back with anything other than the lash. He touched the first scar. He traced it with his fingertip from end to end, softly, slowly, the way a man reads a line of writing in the dark by touch. Then he lowered his head and pressed his lips to the scar. The kiss was warm. It was the warm, dry press of his lips against the raised white ridge of the scar on her brown skin, and the warmth of it went through the scar and into the memory underneath it. And the memory of the first lash, the one that had been laid down when she was 12, the one that had taught her what pain was. The memory softened. It did not disappear. It would never disappear. But it softened the way a hard thing softens when something warm is held against it for long enough. He moved to the second scar. He traced it with his fingertip. He kissed it. He moved to the third, the fourth, the fifth. She stood in the warm light of the library fire with her bare, scarred back to the Alpha King, and the Alpha King kissed every scar. He kissed them slowly. He kissed them with the patient, precise attention of a man who understood that each scar was a separate wound, and each wound deserved its own acknowledgement. He did not hurry. He did not skip any. He started at the top of her right shoulder, and he worked his way down the careful parallel lines of the ledger on her back, and his lips were warm on every ridge, and his breath was warm on her skin, and his great hands were steady now. The trembling had stopped, and the wolf inside his chest was pressed against the wall of him, and she could feel the wolf watching her through the wall, and the wolf's eyes were the color of molten amber, and the wolf was crying. The 25th scar, the 50th. Nessa was crying too. Not the breaking cry of the garden 3 weeks ago. This was a different kind of crying. A small, quiet stream, steady and warm. The kind of crying that is not grief, but the release of something older than grief. The release of the belief that the scars on her back made her less, that the ledger on her back was something to be hidden, that the thing Aldric Cravenmoor had carved into her skin was her story. It was not her story. Her story was the girl who had been lashed 100 times and had not broken. Her story was the girl who had whispered in the dark to the younger Omegas. Her story was the girl who had ridden 4 days on a thin horse to the hold of a king she expected to despise her, and had found instead a warm room and a meal and a bolt on the inside of the door. Her story was the girl who was standing in the warm light of a library fire while the most powerful wolf in the Northern Territories knelt behind her and kissed the scars on her back one by one. Not because the scars were beautiful, not because the scars were a lesson, but because the girl who carried them was worth kneeling for. the 75th, the 90th. He reached the last scar, the newest one, the one at the base of her spine, laid down 6 months ago for the crime of helping 2 younger Omegas slip through the eastern gate. He traced it with his fingertip, and he pressed his lips to it, and he held them there for a long moment, and the warmth of the kiss went through the scar and into the memory of the 2 young Omegas running through the eastern gate in the dark, running toward something better, running because Nessa had shown them the way, and the memory did not soften. The memory hardened. The memory became something she was proud of. He straightened. He stood behind her. She could feel the heat of him, and the controlled breathing of him, and the wolf inside him that was still pressed against the wall of his chest, and the wolf's amber eyes were still burning through the wall. "Turn around, Nessa." She turned. His face was wet. The Alpha King of the Northern Territories had tears on his broad face, running down into his short, thick, dark beard, and his dark, iron-gray eyes with the ring of molten amber were red and bright and full of the wolf, and the wolf was looking at her through the king's eyes, and the wolf had been waiting for her, and the wolf had found her, and the wolf was not going to let her go. "You are not what he said you were," Fenric Greymarch said. His voice was rough and low. "You are not the scarred one. You are not the marked girl. You are not his finest work. You are the bravest woman in the Northern Territories, and every scar on your back is a line in a story about a girl who was beaten 100 times and stood up 101, and I would carry that story on my own back if you would let me." She reached out and laid her small brown hand flat against his broad chest. It was the first time she had touched him. It was the first touch, hers to give, freely given, and the moment her hand made contact with the warm black wool of his tunic over the steady beating of his heart, the wolf inside his chest rose up and pressed against her hand through the wall of him, and the wolf inside her own chest. The small, quiet wolf she had not known was there, the wolf that had been sleeping underneath the scars for 10 years, hidden so deep that even Aldric Cravenmoor's lash had not been able to reach it. The small, quiet wolf woke up. The wolf was amber, a small, dark wolf with amber eyes, the deep, warm amber of river clay in the summer, and the wolf rose up in the small, still place in Nessa's chest and opened her amber eyes for the first time and looked through Nessa's ribs at the great dark wolf inside the Alpha King's chest, and the great dark wolf looked back at her, and between them a line of golden light began to burn. The mate bond. The golden light blazed from where Nessa's hand lay flat against Fenric's chest, and it spread outward through both of them in slow, warm waves, and Nessa felt it move through her like sunlight moving through water, warm, slow, reaching into every cold place, into every scar, into every memory of the lash, filling them with gold, not erasing them, but illuminating them, turning them from wounds into proof, from a ledger of cruelty into a record of survival. Fenric's great hand came up and covered her small hand where it lay against his chest. His dark iron-gray eyes, with the blazing ring of molten amber, looked down into her dark brown eyes with the blazing ring of deep amber, and the 2 wolves inside them looked at each other through the golden light, and the bond settled between them like a bridge built of fire. "Nessa," he said, "I am here. Will you stay?" She looked up at him. The broad, strong face, the twice-broken nose, the short, thick, dark beard, the dark, iron-gray eyes that had seen through every lie she had ever been told about herself. She looked up at the man who had given her a warm room and a bolt on the inside of the door, and had waited 6 weeks for her to touch him first. She looked up at the man who had knelt behind her in the warm light of a library fire, and kissed 100 scars on her back without being asked and without asking anything in return. "I will stay," she said. "I will stay, Fenric Greymarch. Not because you are the Alpha King, not because you freed me from Cravenmoor, not because you gave me a room and a meal and a place in your hall. I will stay because you are the first man in my life who has seen every scar on my back and has not looked away." He bent his great head and pressed his forehead against hers, and the golden light of the bond burned between them, and the small, dark, amber wolf inside her chest pressed herself against the great dark wolf inside his, and the 2 wolves breathed together for the first time. and the library was very quiet, and the snow fell against the window, and the fire burned low, and the 100 scars on her back were warm. The binding ceremony was held in the walled garden at the eastern side of the hold on the first morning of spring. The garden was changed. The winter earth that had been hard and bare when Nessa had first walked through it on her second day in the hold was now soft and dark and breaking open with the first wildflowers of the season, small white star-shaped blooms with gold centers pushing up between the pale stones of the garden beds. The morning light came over the eastern wall in long, warm shafts, and the air was cool and clean and smelled of turned earth and new growth, and the snow was gone from the high plain except for a few small patches in the shadows of the garden wall. The household wolves of Greymarch filled the garden, the guards in their grey coats, the kitchen women, the household staff, the riders who had carried the summons to Cravenmoor. Marin stood near the eastern wall with her silver-streaked red hair catching the morning light and her warm brown eyes bright with tears she was not trying to hide. Torben stood at the foot of the high seat with his hands behind his back and his steady blue eyes on the garden entrance. And in the center of the garden, in a circle of pale stones laid into the dark earth, Nessa stood in a new dress. Not the gray wool dress she had worn for the last 3 months, but a dress of deep amber wool with dark brown embroidery at the cuffs and hem, the color chosen by Maren to match the ring of amber around her eyes. The dress had a high collar and long sleeves that covered her back completely because the scars on her back were hers, and she would show them or hide them as she chose, and the choice was hers and no one else's. And that was the law now. Her short black hair was brushed and clean, and there was a single small white star flower tucked behind her left ear, placed there by Maren an hour ago with hands that trembled with the same quiet joy that had been on the healer's face for 3 months. Her dark brown skin was warm in the spring light, and her dark brown eyes with the ring of deep amber were steady, and the full mouth that had forgotten how to smile had remembered, and the smile she wore was small and real and certain. Fenric Greymarch walked into the garden. He wore a long coat of dark gray wool, freshly brushed, with the black wolf fur lining visible at the collar and the cuffs, and the silver wolf head clasps shining in the morning light. His dark brown hair was cropped clean, and the heavy wave on top fell neatly across his forehead. His broad face was clean-shaven for the first time since she had known him. The short, thick, dark beard was gone, and beneath it was the strong jaw and the twice-broken nose and the full, steady mouth of a man who looked younger without the beard and more open, and, she realized with a small shock, almost gentle, the iron ring of the high seat was on his hand. His dark iron-gray eyes found hers across the garden, and the ring of molten amber flared bright. He came to the circle of pale stones and stood before her. The garden went quiet. The wind moved the white star flowers between the stones, and the morning light was gold on the pale garden walls. He held out his hands, palms up. She placed her small brown hands in his great broad ones. The golden mate bond, the bond that had been burning between them since the night in the library, flared to life where their hands met, and the golden light spread outward through the circle of pale stones and into the garden, and the white star flowers with their gold centers began to glow. "Nessa of the high country," Fenric said. His voice was low and quiet and clear, and it carried to every wolf in the garden. "I have not asked you to be anything but what you are. I have not asked you to hide your scars or to forget where they came from. I have not asked you to be grateful or to be loyal or to be anything other than the girl who was beaten 100 times and stood up 101. I ask you now only one thing. I ask you to stand beside me. Not behind me, not below me, not in the shadow of me. Beside me, for as long as you will have me." Nessa looked up at him. The golden light was in his eyes and on his face and on his great broad hands that held hers, and the small dark amber wolf in her chest was standing on all 4 paws with her amber eyes wide open, and the great dark wolf in his chest was watching her through the golden light, and the bridge of fire between them was solid and warm and would not break. "Fenric of Greymarch," she said. Her voice was steady and clear, and it did not tremble. "I came to your hold on a thin horse with 100 scars on my back and no reason to believe you would be any different from the man who gave them to me. You gave me a warm room and a door that bolts from the inside, and you did not ask to see my back. You waited. You let me show you when I was ready. You kissed every scar. You did not look away. She paused. The tears were on her face, but her voice did not break. I will stand beside you, not because I owe you, not because you saved me, because you are the man who saw every scar and did not flinch, because you are the man who understood that the scars are not my story. The standing up is my story, and I want to stand beside the man who understood that. The golden mate bond blazed. It blazed from their joined hands and spread outward through the garden in slow, warm waves, and the white star flowers glowed like small gold lanterns in the dark earth, and the pale stones of the circle hummed with the deep, low resonance of the old laws, and the household wolves of Greymarch felt the bond move through them like a warm wind. Merrin was crying openly, her old weathered face lit with the gold, her silver-streaked red hair blazing copper in the bond light. Torben, the steady second, who had not shown emotion in anyone's memory, had his jaw set tight and his blue eyes bright. The small, dark amber wolf inside Nessa's chest stepped forward. The wolf pressed through the wall of Nessa's ribs and out into the golden light. She was not a large wolf. She was small and lean, and her fur was the deep, warm brown of dark river clay, and her eyes were the amber of the ring around Nessa's pupils. And she stood in the golden light beside Nessa's feet, and she lifted her small head, and she looked at the great dark wolf inside the Alpha King's chest. And the great dark wolf came forward and pressed through the wall of the king's ribs and stood in the golden light, enormous and dark and steady, with his iron-gray eyes and his ring of molten amber, and the two wolves touched noses in the center of the circle of pale stones. The bond settled. It settled into them like a root settling into dark spring earth, and the golden light dimmed slowly from blaze to glow to the quiet, steady warmth of a thing that would burn for the rest of their lives. Fenric Greymarch bent his great head and kissed her on the mouth. It was a soft kiss, warm and careful and unhurried, the kiss of a man who had waited 6 weeks for her to touch him first, and who would wait another 6 weeks or 6 years for anything she was not ready to give. And Nessa kissed him back, and the small, dark amber wolf at her feet pressed against the great, dark wolf at his. And the garden was full of gold, and the 100 scars on her back were warm, and the morning was new, and the high plain stretched out beyond the eastern wall to the far mountains where the last of the winter snow was melting, and the spring was here.